I haven't been drinking lately, but like, I don't know. I feel like doing it today.
I'm Austinlugo.
I'm Andrew Harp.
This is With Nothing to Say.
Audition, the 1999 Takashi Miike film. Audition. Similar to House, this is a movie I saw last year. Really enjoyed it. Became an all-time favorite. Another Japanese horror film. I guess, Austin, can you tell me what the movie is about briefly?
At the beginning of the film, a man's wife dies, and him and his son are basically alone for like 10 years, just the two of them. And after years and years of just being the two of them, the son's kind of a late teenager, high school, maybe like late high school, somewhere around then. And he finally gets a girlfriend, and he pushes his dad to, go back into the field, go out and find someone. And so the father's friend, best friend of some sort,
Like a business partner too.
business partner, right, is like a filmmaker. So he's a director and a casting director, and he does all these different things. And he says, oh, well, you're looking for a girlfriend. Why don't we just run auditions for this fake film? Although if it's fake is kind of up in the air. And then whichever one you like the most, you can basically marry them. As you can imagine, does not go the way they planned, and it turns into chaos.
Yeah, very controlled chaos. Yeah. The reason why I picked this movie is because, like I said, I love it. Another Japanese horror film, but it's very different from House in that, like, you had your reservations about House, and that it's insane from beginning to end. That movie is just insane. Crazy animation, crazy editing, all around just like a crazy movie. I love it. But I wanted to pick Audition because it's another Japanese horror film, but it's very reserved and very slow and very quiet. It's pretty much the opposite of House, but it's still very, very dark and very, very, maybe even darker in a lot of ways than House is. But it's very dark, very violent, especially when you get to the end. So that's kind of why I picked it. But yeah, we'll get into that.
So the film opens up with the death of the wife, and the son is walking in with a bouquet of flowers, I believe, and he's walking down this. Is that what
he made like a project, right?
Yes, it's like an art project or something.
Yeah.
And he's walking down this like white, pristine, kind of eerie, almost hospital hallway. And as he's walking down, you can see the father having these final words with wife. And it's, as you said, it's very controlled. It's very slow. I think something that this film does really well is it's an incredibly patient film.
Yeah.
And it will hold on to scenes so long. Like it'll hold on to a shot way longer than what would typically be normal for a film. And I think it's also interesting that for a lot of the first part of the film, for a lot of those longer shots, it's actually from behind the father. Like you don't actually see his face a lot. There's a lot from behind him or from his side. There's very little close-ups of his face early on in the film, which I think is interesting. And even that shot in the hospital with the death of the wife and mother, it's like this very pulled back, far. It feels very far away in a way that a lot of the film does. You feel almost like you're disturbing. Like it doesn't feel so much as you're watching a movie as it does like you're watching this family kind of break down, and you're watching from like this weird distance, and it creates this eerie, uncomfortable, almost stalker-esque feeling. And as the wife dies, right after she dies, the son walks in, which is a pretty intense way to start the film.
Yeah, very, very intense. And then pretty much like right away when it cuts, it's years later, probably like 15 years later, I think it says, or something like that. It's pretty much established that like the dad and the son seem to have a good relationship, maybe a little awkward.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. One of my favorite parts about the movie too is that like people aren't necessarily very cut and dry. You know what I mean? Everyone's pretty much like a normal person. No one's evil, no one's like good. It's a complicated movie in terms of how people are and how people act. There's no like evil person, there's no good person. So that's one of the reasons why I like about it. And the relationship between the dad and the son, while it is complicated, it's not like a bad relationship. They don't hate each other, they hang out, they go fishing. So yeah, you're established the fact that like, oh, they're fishing, they're having a good time. And it's kind of funny watching it again. They kind of talk about like, oh, it's a great catch, you know what I mean, which I feel like kind of sets up kind of later on about dating and having girlfriends and stuff like that. And then, yeah, I think not too soon after they go fishing, his son's kind of pretty much just kind of teasing his dad and is like, you really should date someone else. His son is basically just giving him the go ahead. Like, look, like mom's been gone for a while. We love mom, but you need to find another wife, find another girlfriend, kind of move on with your life. I think it's time because you're getting old.
Yeah.
His son isn't being mean. He's kind of bright. You know what I mean? He's kind
Yeah.
of teaching him, kind of being kind of honest. You know what I mean? If it was like an American comedy, it would be like super mean. Like the kid would be like a horrible,
Yeah.
like a little piece of like crap. You know what I mean? But it's more kind of like teasing and kind of almost him giving his blessing that dad, like, yeah, you can go and do this if you need to.
It definitely comes from a genuine place of care and love. And that scene is it is just so beautifully blocked in the way that, especially when that whole conversation is taking place, the camera is pretty far back.
Yes, they're having dinner, right? They're having dinner.
Yeah, they're eating dinner. And basically after that opening shot, it's just the entire scene takes place from that one shot pretty far back. You don't really see his emotions or like how he's reacting to this whole thing. You only see the sun. And even him, he's pretty far off in the distance and it's kind of dark. And you're kind of forced to create, and I think this is true with the whole film, is you have to make your own assumptions, which is sort of the danger of, I would argue, the father and many of the characters is they're forced to make these assumptions. And as a viewer, you're also sort of more forced to make these assumptions, which create these sort of dangerous layers.
Absolutely, yeah, and like you said, that shot from that last shot of that scene, it's held on for a while. I think like the kid, after they're done talking, he gets up and he kind of puts away the dishes and stuff like that. It kind of goes on for a little while, but it's perfect. It's very good. It's paced, really well as it probably can be. I think after that, he talks to his friend, our main
Yeah.
character.
Yeah, at the bar, right?
Yeah, I think it's established that like I think that the dad is a successful movie guy. Like he's in the movie business, film business,
Yeah.
and he's somewhat successful, it seems like. And he has a conversation at the bar with his business partner and friend, which I think that the bar conversation might be one of my favorite scenes in the movie. It's kind of amazing. Like I don't know if you feel the same way. It's just like a conversation between two guys at a bar, but I don't know. There's something so like amazing about it. You're so locked into the whole thing.
Yeah, there's something mesmerizing about it, which is so strange. I mean, like you're saying, it's literally just two people sitting at a bar talking. There's something almost ominous about that. And I remember when I was watching it, like the bartender feels weird.
Yeah.
I don't know, like even like at the beginning, there's something, I don't know, it just felt weird, and you're just like so pulled in by honestly this conversation that's pretty just like an average conversation between two people. Like it's not like they're saying anything, out there. So I mean, of course, there's kind of, it's sort of ridiculous, and
It's a realistic conversation.
yeah, it's a realistic conversation. I mean, it's a dry humor, but it's a really funny, like it's a genuinely funny movie. And there's a lot of points in this movie where I couldn't help but like genuinely laugh because and this conversation, even though again there's this sort of weird, ominous tension that I wasn't able to sort of like, I don't know why I felt it, but even going through that, it was a very funny conversation. And that's where, of course, as you said, it's established that they're going to hold auditions for his new wife.
Yep. His friend just was like, hey, we make films. We should make a film and hold auditions for you to get a new wife. These girls will be young, which is what he wants. He wants like a younger woman. They'll be, well accomplished. They'll be interesting. You'll be able to talk to them. You can ask them whatever you want. You'll be able to read their resumes and their essays and kind of know everything about them, sort of at a surface level, of course. And you'll be able to select from a large range of women to potentially date. It's kind of, like Tinder or something like that, kind of, swiping through all these women, but we'll get to that later. And they concoct this plan. You mentioned they make a fake movie. It's not really a fake movie, but they're not like confident that it's going to go anywhere. So it's more or less kind of,
it's kind of like, have you ever seen The Producers?
I watched that movie very recently. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like the same idea. Like they really don't care if it ever makes any money. It's just like a secondary thing. Like it has the funding. So I guess it is technically a real movie, but they're not really interested in if it goes anywhere.
Like in The Producers, it would probably make it more complicated if they actually had to make the movie.
Yeah.
How like in Producers, now that the play is successful, it has now complicated everything.
Yeah.
It did not go the way that they expected, but they expect that it won't get any funding, and they're pretty much correct. But you mentioned it being funny. I love the scene where he's at his desk and he's reading the applications of the different actresses, and he opens up like 10 folders, like manila folders,
Yeah.
of like just stacks and stacks of like auditions and of women who have trying out for, I'm guessing, the lead part. Before that, though, they kind of talk a little bit about the kind of women that he wants, and they talk about how, like, I think the main character, he might mention or say something about like, what if the movie is made and she's the main part, da, da, da. And I think the guy, his friend, is like, are you kidding me? You don't want the girl who gets the main part or something like that. Like, you don't want that kind of person. Like, that person is like depressed or something, being mean. It's like they'll be a good actress, which means that they're very depressed or something like that. So they're definitely like a little bit sexist, but not in a very obvious way, which once again kind of complicates them. You know what I mean? They're not like women, they're more kind of subtle with their sexism, which kind of complicates what they want. And the thing about the main character too that complicates him is that he's not looking for sex, not necessarily.
Yeah.
He wants to find a wife, someone to marry, someone that he actually like loves and cares about. So it's like, it's still very unethical that he's doing this. You shouldn't do that ever. But his intentions are kind of pure. Like, he's not trying to like have sex with as many women as possible. He's just trying to find one person that he could potentially marry. Yeah. So it's very complicated.
So he's looking through all of these. I mean, it's basically just, like you said, like a stack of women, and he's mostly just looking at the pictures. Like, he'll like peruse their essay, but you can tell that he doesn't really care. And
he remembers his friend saying like, look, don't just look at the pictures, read the essays as well. But he's kind of looking at the pictures as well. Actually, you know what? He calls him on the phone. He's like, look, there's so many, like, what am I going to do? There's so many. He's like, take your time, but don't just look at the pictures, try to read the essays. And then his son, I think at one point too, comes in and he's like, hey, I have a friend, a girlfriend, and we're just hanging out. Just want to let you know. It's like, oh, okay, cool. And then he spills his coffee on a specific application.
And it's Asami's application that he spills it on, right? And that's how he kind of, yes. And so he reads her application, which is, she used to be this ballet dancer when she was a kid, but due to a hip injury, I think is all she says, was unable to pursue her career anymore, and she describes the way giving up. In this very sort of poetic kind of language, she describes how it's very similar to death or loss. And of course, he's looking at the photo of his wife, and he's like, she's just like me, even though perhaps it's still a bit surface level from his perspective. You can see that he's trying to find a genuine connection here. And like you said, even though there is, it does feel a little male gazy, there is some sort of sexist undertones to it. He's not like a overtly sexist person. He's not someone who sees himself as like, sexist or better than women or anything like that. But
yeah, he's not like evil. He's not like he doesn't know how to like approach women anymore, because he probably dated his wife, married his wife, was with his wife, she died, then he didn't date for 10, 15 years. Yeah. Now he's like, I don't know what to do now. I guess we can do this thing because we know it's easy to do, and it gives me options, but it's still kind of weird, you still shouldn't do that. So it's very interesting. Yeah. But yeah, like you said, he is clearly enthralled by the essay. And also, we forgot to say that his friend told him like select 30 out of the applications. And I think that's when he meets his son's, girlfriend, which is a very small scene, but they're looking at dinosaur pictures.
Yeah, his son is like obsessed with dinosaurs. Yeah. I can't really grasp much of the significance of it other than, I don't know.
That's what I thought too. I was watching it again. This is the second time I've seen this movie, and I thought the same thing. I was like, what's the significance that he likes dinosaurs? And I think it's just a quirk, like it doesn't really like mean anything in the grand scheme of the story. It's just like a thing that his son likes,
Well, maybe it has something to do with this idea of being obsessed with the past and obsessed with things that no longer exist. Because just like through a lot of the film, the father is obsessed with his wife, or even with Asami, right? He's obsessed with this idea of Asami, this idealization of Asami. In the same way, the son is obsessed with the idealization of these dinosaurs, and he's seeing them as not necessarily as living animals because they're all dead, but as this idealized version of it. And I think that's the only like real connection.
The best reading you can possibly do, but I feel like that's just kind of like it's very thin, you know what I mean? Because it's like, I still feel like it's just kind of like a quirk that they put in. That's probably the best reading you could probably input into it. I think it's just like his son is like, I don't know, a nerd, I guess they're also trying to say. Like, but he has a girlfriend, and he meets his girlfriend, and the dad does. He meets his son's girlfriend, not really a girlfriend, more like a friend, and she's nice and stuff like that. And he leaves, and I think pretty much after that you get to the audition scene, which
Yeah.
is an amazing montage, one of the best
It,
montages.
it is an absolutely incredible montage. I love every single minute of the montage. It is so, and this is another thing about this movie, even though it at times can be very patient, the editing is just absolutely incredible and meticulous and so on point. And at this, like, it just moves so well. It flows so beautifully, and you meet like all these different people, and they all have like these different quirks, and it's all like, it's kind of silly and fun.
Yeah, it's a scene out of like an American, you
Mhm.
know, comedy or something like that. Not like a sex comedy, but like you said, more like a kind of a adult, but not like too adult comedy
Yeah.
kind of thing. But yeah, super funny. I love the fact that it seems like the friend, the main character's friend, it seems like he asks a different question for every person that auditions. I
Yeah.
love the effect that it creates when it's all
Yeah.
edited together. It gives that effect. That's why I love the movie so much. It's able to kind of do slow really well, but then when it kind of goes into kind of like the audition scene, it's a little faster, and you're meeting tons of people like they are, just like one girl after another that they're interviewing for the role. And like you said, they have all their little quirks, uh, which is great. I mean, at one point, like a girl, you don't know why, but she strips naked.
Yep.
Like, wait, what? Like they're asked about like their sex lives for some reason, just like random. Which I assume they must. I bet you like for like movies like this where they have to interview like dozens and dozens of actresses. I'm sure casting directors do that sometime. I mean, I don't have experience in that, but I bet casting directors, just to mix it up, like probably do that where they're just kind of like, all right, like I'm just gonna make up like a random question that I haven't told the last, you know what I mean? Just kind of like, I want to like ask like different questions to kind of mix it up so it's not like I'm asking the same questions over and over. So that method kind of makes sense, but here it's done very comedically and very sillily, I guess you could say.
Just a little hint of a casting couch sort of
Yeah.
vibe going on here.
Because they're not auditioning for the movie technically, they're
Right.
auditioning to be the guy's wife, uh, but they think they're auditioning to be in the movie.
Hmm.
They're not having sex with the guys, of course,
No, no.
but they're saying like really weird things, and
Yeah.
you know asking weird questions, and very very interesting. And they established that Asami is, I think, the 28th person that's being interviewed.
So throughout the whole thing, the only person asking the question is the business partner. He's the one asking all the questions, and the father, he's been silent the whole time. He's said nothing. He's like, I'm nervous. I don't know. I feel weird about the whole thing, which understandable. But when he sees Asami, that's when he asks his first question, and he asks about her ballet.
Yeah, he's basically anticipating to talk to her,
Mhm.
and he kind of like doesn't really. He kind of asks her about her ballet, but then he kind of like gushes, you know what I mean, about how like awesome and great and strong she was.
That's also a really good point. He really doesn't ask her much of anything. He kind of just talks. And again, it goes into this idea of idealization. He's idealizing this idea of who she is, but he doesn't really let her speak that much or say much of anything. He's basically already decided, right?
Yeah,
But from the moment he saw her, you know, essay, picture really, and sort of essay, he's already decided this is the person. And so then when she's in the audition, she says like 5 words and he just gushes for like 5 minutes.
she kind of also sets up the fact that like, yeah, she was a ballet dancer, something happened, she got hurt, she couldn't do it anymore, and now she kind of has a manager at a record company, and that's kind of like her contact, I guess you could say. She says she's gotten offers, but she's never been in a movie before, and yeah, like you said, gushes, she leaves, and then he has a conversation with his friend where the friend is just kind of like, he's like, he's basically just like, you should have played your hand so hard, just kind of like an interviewer doesn't, well, an auditioner doesn't really say stuff like that.
Yeah.
You're kind of being very obvious that like you're infatuated with this person. And he basically says something along the lines like, yeah, she seems nice, she seems cool, but she kind of gives me the creeps.
The business partner basically like calls around and figures out that she wasn't actually, or like the person at the record company that supposedly was her agent disappeared 18 months ago, and no one's
Yeah.
heard from this person since.
Yeah, the main character's friend is the smartest character in the movie. He's extremely intelligent.
Yeah.
He's nice, but he's at least like reasonable. He has a feeling,
Mhm.
and he investigates it, and he finds out, okay, something's kind of wrong. And like you said, it turns out that the contact you provided is a guy that's been missing for a while. So the guy calls Asami,
Mhm.
and he's like, "Hey, we should get like dinner." I think is pretty much what they do.
Mhm.
He's like, "Hey, we should get some dinner," and then he talks to his friend, and his friend is basically just like, "It's great, I love it." It's like a scene of the friend talking on the phone, uninterrupted, him just saying like, "Hey, look, I looked into this, and for some reason, the one contact that Asami gave us, it's a guy that disappeared. We don't know where he is. It's very strange. I just want to let you know." Hard cut. They're at dinner. like the main character does not care at all. He does not care about any of his friends' like reservations. So good. Just the hard cut. Just bam, they're at dinner. No. He said he finishes talking to the main character, and you don't even hear what the main character says. It's just like a hard cut.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. It's beautiful and jarring, and one of the first moments where like something feels off. It definitely feels off.
When they first start going to dinner, we really only get like their first half of
Mhm.
their conversations, and then we get their second half of their conversations later in the movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right. It starts doing these things where it hard cuts between their different dates, their early dates.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're just kind of getting to know each other a little bit, where she's from, what she's doing. She establishes the fact that I think she works at a bar, like at a random bar.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're just kind of taking time talking to each other.
And he asks to even go to the bar, and she's like, no, you don't want to. She gives kind of this weird, vague, sort of mysterious answer, and he, of course, immediately buys it.
He does not care about any. He's just like, oh, we'll work through it. I think he says like, I'll handle it. If something's wrong, I'll figure it out.
And that's also where you get the first introduction of her family. She talks about her father who lives in Chiba very briefly, and that's kind of the end. And then once they cut to the fancy diner, it's so beautiful because the way they shoot it, it's just like a shot reverse shot, so it looks like it's the same conversation happening. So like it feels right, it feels like it's the same conversation until you realize they're in the fancy restaurant, and the conversation kind of, I mean, it basically continues where it was, almost where it was.
Yeah, it's just their conversations are one and the same because they're still getting to know each other.
Mhm.
But I think his friend is like, look, I know you like her. Chill out. Call her later. Like delay
Right.
your attention. And I think he does that for a little while when he gets kind of antsy. And it's established, by the way, it's established at this point that there is something wrong with Asami because we've seen a couple flashes of her in her apartment that has no furniture.
So
And
creepy.
she's sitting next to her phone waiting for him to call.
And you see a bag, a
Yeah,
brown bag.
you see a sack and you're just kind of like, huh, okay. It's like a sack.
And
It's
you
like,
hear like a growling in the sack, like a weird guttural growling.
I wonder what this will be. Anyway.
Nothing good.
Yeah, nothing. Probably. It's probably like a sack of potatoes or something like that. Yeah, so he calls and has that scene where she's like looking down and she like slowly smiles and stuff. Very creepy.
Terrifying.
Just
An
like,
incredible performance.
yeah, she's really good. All performances are great in the movie.
Yeah.
By the way, the music in the movie, just to mention it briefly, amazing, beautiful, classical. Just great score, beautiful, works really well. Takashi Miike, just to talk briefly about him, I think I told you, he's made all kinds of movies. I think he's made over 100 movies.
Yeah.
He's made samurai movies, action movies. He made a musical comedy movie. He's made video game adaptation movies. And I think more or less this is what's considered his best film, his most celebrated one. And of the ones that I've seen by him, this is easily his most patient and slow moving film. He has a great movie called Ichi the Killer. I'm not going to pick that movie for the show, but I recommend you watch it. If you thought this movie was crazy, you'll probably think Ichi the Killer is. I would say that movie is more similar to House in that like it's just nonstop violence and insanity.
Mm-hmm.
Very good though, still very good. I read on the Wikipedia page that the studio that made this movie was the studio that made Ring, which I haven't seen, but that was a big deal. And they wanted to make another horror movie, and this movie is based off a novel by Ryo Murakami, who wrote this movie called In the Miso Soup, which I read recently. And that movie has kind of almost the same trajectory, honestly. The novel In the Miso Soup, it has kind of the same trajectory where you're kind of introduced to these characters and you slowly get to know them until it eventually kind of like hits at the very, very end, near the end, more or less, where something is wrong. So from what the other movies I've seen by Maike, he kind of, it seems like he really values kind of like fast pacedness a little bit more. But in this movie, I think he's more reserved, and it's clear that he succeeds very well. So yeah, music, performance, it all comes together very well, in my opinion.
So then after the dinner scene,
I think he has a conversation with his son. I think his son kind of lets him know, like, more or less, like, okay, I know you've been seeing a woman, and I'm very happy for you. It's pretty much the conversation, like, that's awesome. I'm glad you're, seeing someone else, and she seems really nice. I don't think they've met at all, the son, and I don't think they meet. Well, they meet later, but
the only person that's met Asami really is the business partner, and that was only at the audition. No one else has met her.
Sure, yeah. But then, yeah, I think he tells his son, like, we're going on a trip. We're going on basically a holiday to a hotel and like a beachfront thing or whatever.
And that's right. That's when he tells his son that he's going to propose to Asami.
Yes, that's true. Yep.
And he's like, cool. Good job, Dad. He seems to be supportive of the whole thing.
Something like that, yeah. But yeah, they go to the seaside hotel, and he like arrives there, and I think she's already there.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like looking out into the sea. That seems really beautiful. It's very nice, very just simple, patient, well paced. He comes there to the seaside hotel. She sees her looking out to the seaside. You get a shot of the seaside, just the seaside. Very, very nice. Just kind of sets it up really well in a very patient, slow way. Very nice.
And then after that, they're inside the hotel room, and he's like, what do you want? Like, do you want to go here for dinner? Or do you want to do this? And she basically hops into bed. She takes off all her clothes.
Very slowly, very
seductively. Although no nudity. I think it's interesting that the only nudity in the film was that one scene at the audition where that woman stripped. There's no other nudity in the film. So she, strips in the sort of Hollywood, kind of like hiding, all the essential parts, and she climbs under the covers, and he walks over to her, still fully clothed, and he starts to take his clothes off, and she's like, no, just like watch. She slowly pulls the bed sheet up her leg very seductively until you see pretty far up her thigh 2 red marks.
Yeah, like burn marks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Asami is basically just like, please, love me and no one else. And he's like, okay. And they get into bed, and there's no sex scene or anything like that, but it's established that they probably did have sex.
I do love that cut though, because they're like,
they roll over, right?
They roll over, and then it cuts to that white sheet, and so it looks like it's like one of them on top of the other, and it pushes forward, and you see it's just him in the bed alone. It's a brilliant use of editing and just like tricking the viewer, as like they've done multiple times now, just kind of tricking the viewer into thinking this sort of optical illusion.
There's really like no cut. It just kind of happens, and you're just like, oh, we're in the future now. It just happens very quickly, and right away you're like, okay, they've had sex and it's the future, but it happens very quickly. It's very, it's like kind of an illusion, like you said, an illusion. So it's very good. But I think he calls the front desk, and because he's not in the bed.
No, the front desk calls them, which I thought was a little weird, because they call him because they're like, your friend left.
Yeah. He's like, what? Yeah, he's like, it left? And pretty much from this point forward, we won't see Asami until the very, very end.
It goes from like your classic maybe rom-com to it turns into a more at this point there's this sort of film noir kind of feel to it for the middle half of the film.
I would totally agree with you. Once you get into like the last like third or fourth of the movie, it becomes a little bit more weird. It gets a little confusing, you might say, just a little bit, not in a bad way.
Yeah.
It becomes a little bit less linear very quickly, but it kind of makes sense because you're kind of spiraling into despair.
So he goes back home, and he like calls up his business partner because she's like, I think they meet in like the office or something, and he basically says that he can't find her anywhere. Do you have like an address or anything? And he's like, well, I'm usually not supposed to give it, but they didn't actually give. There was no home address, right? They had given the record place, right? Is that was the home address that they gave?
I think so. Yeah, it's just his friend is basically just saying like, look, I'm warning you again. Like something's wrong with her. Like something's wrong. Like
Like,
something's
stop. Yeah.
she's gone, she's disappeared. You need to forget about her. I don't feel good about this. And his friend's just like, and the main character is basically just like, no, fuck you. I'm gonna go find her by myself. I don't need you. Once again, the most intelligent move, the most intelligent character in the movie, more or less. This is definitely the part of the movie where you're just kind of like, okay, is it like a dream? Like I don't know. He goes to the dance studio and it's boarded up, but he hears somebody inside. So he breaks in and he sees a guy in a wheelchair playing a piano very solemnly. He kind of goes up to him and he says like, "Hey, do you know who Asami is?" Blah blah blah. He's trying to get him to talk to him. And the guy at the wheelchair at the piano is very like, go away. I don't care. And I think he starts laughing very maniacally, and he kind of goes up to him and through flashbacks, you kind of realize that the burn marks are from the guy in the wheelchair, who's the ballet guy.
Is Asami's uncle or
I
something?
don't know if there's any relation. I just know that the guy is like a ballet teacher or something like that.
Yeah, she's like 7, 8 years old.
Yeah, that seems hard. That seems very
That seems that seems real intense.
child abuse scene. It's like
Yeah.
it's awful. It's just like he kind of just has like this
like a hot iron, like a stoker.
yeah. It's like really hot, and she puts it like you said on her in her thigh, and it burns her. And I'm assuming they don't really go into it, but I'm assuming there must be like more physical abuse, more sexual abuse or something like that. But you don't. That's really the only child abuse scene that you see, which works really well because if there was more abuse, we don't necessarily need to see it because the scar itself, which you are established later on, almost is like a representation of the scar of being abused, whether it is physically or sexually. You get the idea of watching the scene, of knowing who put the scar on her, and then you can kind of formulate everything else, or at least try to. You don't necessarily need to see like her being sexually abused to understand like, oh, that was probably also in the formula.
Yeah.
So it's very, I think it's effective in kind of telling the story of Asami without like, I don't know, going nuts.
It's all visuals too. There's not really any much of
No.
not really any voiceover or anything. It's all just, and even though like they don't explain anything, like you're well aware of who everyone is, what everyone's doing, and it's intense. Even though it's a scene that's very, in a certain sense, very disturbing and very violent, it's very reserved. And I think it easily could have been done in a way that feels indulgent, and I don't think it does at all. I think it's very well done, very masterfully done, and not indulgent in any way. And that's when we smash cut to him like washing his face.
Well, I think first you find out that the guy in the wheelchair has prosthetic feet. His feet.
Yeah.
And then it cuts.
So he's washing his face, and obviously he's pretty freaked out. And at this point, I think kind of like you were saying earlier, there's this weird dream-like state to the rest of the film. Like time kind of works in a strange way. It's kind of hard to tell when things happen where, especially with the editing.
Yeah, he goes to the bar. He remembers, I think, while he's washing his face, like, oh, she was working on this bar. He's like, okay, find the bar. He goes to the bar and he finds out that it's closed. He's like, oh, that's kind of weird. And a neighbor, a guy who lives, up the stairs, is going. He's like, hey, what happened? Why is it closed? When they'll be back? And I think he tells him like, it's been abandoned for a while. It's been closed for like a couple of years because the owner was killed and dismembered in the bar. However, and kind of explaining kind of what happened, he tells the main character, like, it's kind of weird. They also found, the owner got killed and dismembered, his pieces everywhere. But they also found an extra 3 fingers, an extra ear, and an extra tongue. I don't know why this happens to the main character, but he imagines it.
Yeah.
He imagines like the extra pieces and he freaks out for a second, which is kind of weird. That part of the movie is always kind of confusing because it's like, why is he kind of freaking out? Because it's not like he's drugged. And it's not like he's dreaming. He's like talking to this guy, but for some reason he freaks out. He imagines like the extra pieces and he's like, oh my gosh, he kind of freaks out for a second. I think he just finds it disturbing and he kind of freaks out for a second.
And it is certainly a disturbing, like you kind of see like the tongue move a little bit, which is just, I mean, it's a great effect, but very disturbing.
I think this is when Hasami goes to his house.
They don't even show Asami, right? They just show it's like a POV, a little shaky cam-esque of like running to this rum or like dark liquor that he drinks every night, maybe brandy or whiskey or something. And you can see her kind of like open it up, and you can see her like run up the stairs, and it's this very kind of weird, disturbing. You kind of know that it's Asami somehow. I don't know.
Who else could it be? You know, like,
Yeah. You kind of know that's him, and you know that something's off. So
he sees the picture of his wife too. He sees a picture of his wife,
Yeah.
his dead wife. But like you said, she looks at the liquor, she looks at the picture, and then I think they have a dog. By the way, it's established that they have a dog, and the dog like runs into the room.
Yeah.
Let's see him again. You know, she took care of the dog. But then I think later in that night, it looks like the dad comes home. The main character comes home.
And the son is off with his girlfriend off on like.
Yeah, he's just doing something. He's hanging out, doing something.
And he even says like, hey, if you find the dog, feed him some food. Like I haven't seen him in a while, which at this point you're like, that's creepy and weird. And the father walks into the house. Of course, he pours himself a cup liquor, and he has a sip.
That's such a great scene. That performance is so good. The performance of him like trying to act like he's being paralyzed, like he's in the process of being paralyzed. I've never seen anything like that before. Like people use like I guess paralyzation as like a thing to use, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I've never seen like a scene where a person is like I guess pretending to be in the process of being paralyzed. That's like this honestly, dude, like being paralyzed is like the scariest thing in the world to me. Like that might be scarier than like anything in any movie, you know, just like the fact that like you are no longer in control of like your body, like you can't move it at all barely. It's just like that is scary.
Terrifying.
So yeah, he's like kind of like what's going on. He kind of stands up and then he begins to fall.
That's where you get this incredible sequence. I wouldn't even call it a montage. It's longer than a montage, where you basically get all of this
extra
backstory into things that our main character actually already knew, which I think it's interesting that the film withholds this information from the viewer, but not our protagonist, kind of also showing this idealization that he has, right? He only wants to see the things. And you can see that she told him that she had been abused by the ballet dancer, whoever, a lot of like intense stuff. It shows weird time dilation, right? Where like he's at some point he's like at the, and this doesn't, I can't really grasp.
It's almost like as he's like falling,
mm-hmm.
in the process of about to fall onto the ground. It's almost like he's realizing the fact that like, wait a minute, something's wrong with Asami, you know? And it's almost like the everything that he remembers, including dreams and things that he's worrying about, kind of like shoots up into his brain as he's in the middle of falling into the ground. So yeah, you get like the second half of the conversations of their dates where Asami kind of admits like, yeah, I was abused and, you know, I'm kind of having a tough time and stuff. And then you get back into her apartment, you get into that scene, which is an amazing scene. I love the scene where they're in Asami's apartment and you discover the person in the sack. This person comes out and you get a good introduction of the person coming out of the sack where it's clear that they don't have a tongue and their hands are messed up and they don't have any feet. So they're essentially a mute, immobile, like animal. Essentially, this person has been degraded to be an animal. And I'm assuming this is the person at the record company that has been missing. And I think Asami, she gets like a bowl, you know, and she vomits into it.
Oh.
And she feeds the vomit to the person with no feet.
So,
and it's interesting too, because the main character is there.
Yes.
You know, but it's not like he's actually there. He almost kind of represents, he's almost like the avatar for us. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I love it because he's like this. He's like, you know, he's putting his hand over his mouth because he's not literally at the apartment.
Right, he's not actually there.
It's more like an avatar. But I love that scene. It's very nice. It's disgusting. It's slow. It's clear that something's wrong with Asami from that point forward. And I think like also we get introduced the scene where she returns to the piano teacher as well. And, you know, she goes to the piano teacher who obviously abusive guy. I'm assuming this happens after he talks to, I mean, you know what I mean? It's like,
It's hard to tell when
who
things.
even knows if the main character even talked to the guy at the
Right.
wheelchair at this
Yeah.
point? Like, we don't even know at this point. But she meets him, and it seems like she takes a piano wire, which we'll be acquainted with later. She wraps it around the ballet teacher's head, and he's playing the piano. He doesn't object, by the way. And she fucking pulls and pulls and pulls, and his head just kind of
Pops
falls.
right off.
It's crazy. It's the fucking craziest scene, dude. And I think it's just meant to indicate, like, before he falls to the ground, the kind of person that our main character is dealing with, who is Asami, you know, we're sympathetic to her because she was abused by these, you know, these men.
Yeah.
Horribly. I'm assuming she was probably abused by the record guy, but we're not really sure. The combination of the scene in the apartment, the scene where she decapitates the guy, and the scenes where they have dinner kind of come together to show who Asami really is.
It's one of the most uncomfortable moments I've had in a film in a long time.
Which scene in particular? Just the sequence, or just like?
Well, particularly the scene at the apartment.
Yeah, because you really would be reduced to essentially an animal-like creature if you can't speak, you can't walk, you barely have any hands, and you are essentially forced to eat the vomit of the person who is not even enslaving you, but essentially keeping you in a sack away from any light or anyone else that you know of. And yeah, it comes very quickly, and it comes very powerfully. And then he falls to the ground in his home, our main character, and he is paralyzed.
So he wakes up, Asami's there.
Yeah.
And it is a absolutely brutal scene where she tells him that you're paralyzed, but apparently you feel pain much more than you would if you weren't paralyzed. And she gets these needles and she just starts putting them inside his body.
I will say, I forgot to mention something. He has that one weird part where where Asami's like gonna like give him oral sex, and then she changes. Remember, Asami changes into different women in his life.
Yes.
So one thing that we didn't mention is that at one point she changes into what appears to be one of his workers, and it's established throughout the movie that this person has kind of like a weird, maybe kind of strange sexual relationship with his worker. And then he also changes into his son's girlfriend. That scene is really interesting too, because I think like in that moment too, not only is he realizing who Asami really is, but I think he's also like trying to like compute his like guilt.
Yeah.
Because he feels guilty about trying to get with Asami using the audition. He feels guilty because he essentially used his coworker or worker for sex and then kind of forgot about her. And then he feels guilty because he feels sexually attracted to his son's girlfriend. I'm not saying that like we should feel bad for the guy, but it's clear the guy feels shitty about everything.
The shit he thinks he's done.
Yeah, he feels shitty about the shitty things that he's done. You know, I'm not saying that we should feel bad for him, but he himself does feel bad. You know, he freaks out when his son's girlfriend is on top of him, and he's like, "I'll get away from me." You know, he's upset of the fact that the women in his life don't feel right. And also the other thing too, he also feels guilty about his wife, because you get the scene where they're at the fancy restaurant. Well, he looks over at the main character, and his son and his wife and someone else is at the dinner table, his dead wife, and they have kind of a conversation where he's like, "Hey, this is Asami, blah, blah, blah." So I think once again, it's another thing of guilt where he feels guilty about, even though his wife has been dead for a while, he does feel guilty about kind of maybe turning his back on his wife. You know what I mean? Kind of, she's right over there, you know, like it feels as if his wife is not that far away. So he feels guilty about almost like cheating on his wife, even though she's been dead for a while.
And the wife doesn't approve either. She does not approve of Asami.
Yeah, not necessarily, because it's weird too. It's funny too, because once again, it's not that I think the wife doesn't want him to move on.
Yeah.
It's clear that something is off. Once again, in my opinion, one of the best torture sequences in any movie.
I think something that I find really interesting about the sequence is as she's putting needles in like the most painful parts of his body, it's like his stomach.
Under his ribs. Can you imagine that, dude? Like,
oh my God,
pretty ticklish under the ribs. Like,
oh my God.
Stomach. And did you cringe when she like you said, he's paralyzed, he can't move. She puts like a ton of needles in his stomach, under his ribs, and best performance ever, by the way. This guy, he's like, he really sells the fact that he's being tortured.
He really does.
Which is in the most appropriate ways that his face is red and bulging.
Incredible.
And did you cringe when she like got on top of him?
Yes, that's what I was gonna say, because it feels sort of sexual, doesn't it?
Just putting all these needles, and then she's straddling him, and then she pulls herself up onto him,
pushing all those needles in.
It's like, oh, like you just thought. Yeah, I remember watching that for the first time too, and I'm just like, this can't get any worse. Oh, it just got worse. And then she kind of
right under his eyelids. Oh my God.
And while she's talking to him, and she's basically just kind of like, all you men are the same. You said you would love me forever. I'd be the only one. I do get a feeling that maybe she's a little misinformed. Like, I think she maybe thinks that the guy is married, even though his wife has been dead for a while. But then again, even if she did know that his wife has been dead, would she probably still do it? She probably would.
Probably. Because she was pretty jealous about the son, too. So it feels like.
Yeah, later on, yeah. And she does this thing where she put the needle in like different parts of his body, and she kind of slowly pushes the needles into, just insane torture, just like very, very upsetting. And she gets off of him, and she talks about his son, like, yeah, I'm gonna fuck up your son too, and he's able to say like, no, don't fuck with him. And she's like, see, you love your son, and you said you'd only love me, what the heck.
And she starts to cut his foot off, right? That's when she's
yeah, we're reacquainted with, I think it's piano wire, right?
Yeah, I think so.
He puts clamps on his feet
so he won't bleed out or pass out.
Once again, the most effective torture scene, because the thing about the torture scene is that the movie has appropriately built up to it. It's very slow. The movie's very well paced. You're knowing more and more about the characters and what they want and who they are. And then once you get to the torture scene, it's very effective, very violent. Well, it's not too violent. It's not really like blood and gore. It's very cringe-inducing in a painful way. And you feel like you've earned the torture scene. You feel like you've earned kind of the extremely violent scene that kind of, because it's the guy's fault, because his friend continually tells him like, look, there's something wrong with her. Something's wrong. Something's up. And then you get the torture scene at the end. And so it's satisfying in a kind of weird way. So yeah, she kind of puts clamps on his feet, and using the piano wire, she cuts off one of his feet, just totally. And it looks really real. It really looks like
it really does. Incredible prosthetics. Yeah.
I think she mentions like, oh, this wire is so good at cutting through bone. She says the same thing when she cuts off the ballet teacher's head. Yeah, she fucking cuts it off. I will mention too, by the way, so Ryu Murakami, the author who wrote the Audition novel, he wrote another book called Coin Locker Babies, which I've not read, but apparently Miike was supposed to do an adaptation of this novel, and the novel is about coin-operated locker babies. It occurs in Japan, where infants are left in public lockers, and the presumption is that such lockers are regularly checked by attendants, and the infant will be found quickly. This is the Wikipedia page. Yeah. However, many children are found dead.
Holy shit.
Yeah, it's kind of like the thing where, like parents are like, I got to give up this baby. I'll put it on the foot of like a fire department or something like that. But Ryu Murakami wrote that book, I guess. I don't know if it's about coin locker babies. Who knows what it's about? But it would have been really good to see Miike tackle that topic, or that book, I guess you could say. I think Ryu Murakami, in reading his novel and kind of watching this movie, Ryu Murakami sees kind of like a weird, kind of feels, I guess he views Japan as almost like a failed state in a way, in terms of the people that inhabit it. I think he feels like the people who inhabit it are very flawed. So when you watch like Audition, they mention a lot about how in Japan, like, people are lonely. I think there's a scene early on where the main character is talking to like a film guy. The film guy is like, yeah, people in Japan are lonely. He's like, I think the main character asks like, are you lonely? And the guy's like, aren't you? Like everyone's kind of, I think the culture in Japan is kind of, I think it's like kind of like a criticism of the culture in Japan, where it's almost kind of people are very lonely. They don't really express themselves too much in their trauma.
Yeah.
I don't live in Japan. I'm not Japanese. I am American, and the United States has kind of the same problem as well. So I think Japan also probably has that problem. I've seen that in some Japanese media. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah, Audition's kind of the same way, where it's kind of almost like horrible trauma underneath an audition. It's kind of like a movie about that, where the trauma is really underneath, and it kind of comes to the forefront in like a really like violent, horrible way.
You see that in a lot of really any Japanese work past World War II. You see that sense of loneliness and isolation, especially I'd say especially in Japanese work, more so than you'd see in perhaps other Asian Pacific cultures or American cultures. It's very pronounced there, and I think much so in this film too. So she's cutting off his foot, and as she goes to the second one, that's when the son walks in the door.
That's so stressful because you're just like, the son is totally innocent.
He doesn't know what's going on, and she grabs like a perfume or something from her bag.
It looks like mace.
Like, you think mace?
But it seems like
it's like perfumey though, right? It's not like
yeah. I feel like it's supposed to be mace because she's so like apparent trying to get into his face.
I think it's supposed to knock him out or something.
I guess.
I don't know.
Really bad job.
She's not doing a great job. But she goes and hides, and he walks in. He walks in on his father.
That's so horror filmy, just kind of like a person walks into a room and something that the person doesn't, and it's so good.
And it's like it's kind of like a 3-shot with the father's in the foreground, and he's trying to warn his son, but of course paralyzed. The son's in the midground, and of course in the background is Asami coming towards him.
Yeah, she comes out of the door. It's scary.
Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. And he runs up the stairs. She's chasing after him, spraying this perfume or mace, whatever it is.
Like
hard to say. Still very terrifying. I at least was very terrified for his life. Like
I'm terrified because she's like, she's threatening.
Incredibly. And he gets to the top of the stairs. He slips. She's about to get him, and he kicks her.
Yeah.
She falls down the stairs, and herself is probably severely injured, possibly broken neck. Not dead though, but close to it. And the son somehow gets the nerve to call 911. And Asami says something to the father. It's
almost like she's kind of like reverting back to her self when she's talking to him face to face. Kind of like, I'm lonely, I haven't talked to someone in a long time. I need somebody to talk to. I need someone to be with. Oh, by the way, we forgot to mention, right before she attacks him, remember, he has, the main character has basically a dream about being in bed with Asami.
Yes.
That's important. Yeah, real quick. Yeah, they're in bed, and you think for a second, like, oh, the whole thing was a bad dream, right? And they're in bed, and they kind of talk a little bit, and Asami is just like, I really like you. You seem really nice, blah, blah, blah. And, the main character is like, we should get married. And she's like, yeah, we should. Yeah. And he falls back to sleep, and then once again, we're back in reality where his son's about to get messed up.
Yeah.
He kicks her. She falls down the stairs. He calls the police, and she basically repeats what she said about one of her dates, about being excited to see him, because he ignores her for a while because on the advice of his friend, and she calls him, and they go on a date. She's like, I never thought I'd see you again. It's really nice to see you again. And she basically says the same thing, more or less, like, I never thought you'd call again. I was waiting for you for a long time to call me back. I really liked you, which is maybe the saddest way that the movie could end, because at the end of the day, like, Asami, like, even though she's terrifying, she's a very like broken person, it's clear, abused person, and misunderstood as well, but not necessarily, but she's misunderstood because it's not like the guy is like the most evil person in the world, as we've established, but he's not a good guy either. I guess the question is, does he deserve the torture that he's getting? Because he used his power and his privilege and his position to try to meet a woman, but even Asami says like, I know you're trying to use the auditions so you can have sex with girls, but that's not even necessarily what he wanted, right? He kind of wanted a wife, someone to love. So it's almost kind of like a situation in which maybe if they had been more honest with each other, they would have maybe come to a conclusion where it's like, oh, actually maybe we could have had a relationship, even though Asami, of course, has this skeleton closet where she keeps like her this guy as like a pet. Yeah, and I think pretty much after that the movie ends. I don't think anything happens after that, after her diatribe about how she misses him.
Even though, as you said, Asami is this sort of threatening character at the end, you don't, as you would in say so many other films, like there's no like justice, I suppose. Like in her death, like that doesn't feel good, nor does the torture of nor of any of the characters. It just kind of feels sad and
The whole
just
thing is
intense.
super sad. Yeah. I've seen movies where a person will get revenge or a person, and it's like, oh yeah, the person that's getting revenge on this person deserves to get revenge in the context of the movie, because it's like a crazy movie about a person who gets horribly abused or something, and
Right.
it's like I want to see that person suffer in the context of the movie. But in this movie, yeah, like I said, it's so the torture scene is amazing because you're so confused during it. Part of you is like, yes, like she's getting revenge, you know, but part of you is also like, well, the guy isn't, does he really deserve to be punished in this way? You know, he's not a great guy, but also he's not a super evil guy. He didn't really do anything illegal or super abusive. Oh, he's a little abusive, I guess you could say, but he's not like the most horrible person in the world. But you still sympathize with Asami because, you know, she was horribly abused. You know, it's just, you feel, that's one of the great things about the movie, like I said, is that it's much more complicated than just a good or bad dichotomy, I guess you could say. It's much more complex and confusing, but in a really good way that feels very realistic and very effective.
What would you rate the movie?
I would give it a 9 out of 10. I know I give a lot of 9 out of 10s on the show, but, you know, I picked the movie. It's a favorite. It's a new favorite. Great directing, great writing, looks great, sounds great. It's really hard to kind of like pick anything. I can't really find too much wrong with it for the most part. Maybe it gets a little confusing here and there, but it's a movie that's hard to part and parcel, which I think is part of why it's so good. It's not super cut and dry. It makes you think about who, you know, who's deserving of this, who's deserving of that. So super good.
I think I'm also going to give this movie a 9 out of 10.
Let's go.
It's just so incredible in every single decision, and it's just a masterclass in everything that is filmmaking. The lighting is beautiful, the blocking is magnificent, the editing is brilliant, the score is genius, the story is incredible. The only thing I would say that is really more of a personal thing than anything is the torture scene is a little much for me. And I know it's just a personal thing. It's not an incredible scene. It looks beautiful. It feels intense and uncomfortable. But to me, I would have been okay if there was less of it. Just because to me it feels, I mean, it's not that it isn't deserved, but it does feel a little indulgent. And it's still incredible. And I really have no criticisms for the film at all. I just very uncomfortable feeling, which is the whole point. So it's not even really a criticism. So definitely a 9 out of 10.
It's more like a preference, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of why I picked the movie too. I know you were like apprehensive on House. I love that movie, but Audition seemed like a good movie for you to watch because it's beautiful and patient and slow, but it is a Japanese horror movie.
Yeah.
And it does have its moments that are very disturbing and very violent and strange. So I kind of was curious to see what you thought about it because it is such a beautiful and wonderful movie, but it is so just dark and so just once, especially like you said, the torture scene is just insane. I love the torture scene. I've seen worse, I think. Well, maybe not worse because maybe worse in just terms of content, like blood and gore and crazy shit.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like I said, once again, just the lead up to it, just perfect. And once you get to it, it just feels so satisfying. Once you get to it, it feels so worth it. Once you get to the final, not that like I get enjoyment out of it, but even just kind of the feeling of like, oh my god, like I can't believe this is happening. It looks so real, It's great.
All right, guys, thanks for listening. I'm Austinlugo. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Austinlugo12.
And this is Andrew Harp. Once again, follow me on Twitter at ADHarp24. If you like the show, please give a review, maybe rate it if you'd like, and also subscribe to the show. Thank you so much.